Guys, non-binary passage, your boy Ryder CGA, and I'm back with another cosplay-related prop build, and this time is the glorious Blade of Olympus as seen in the franchise God of War on PlayStation. I've grown up for many years playing God of War. I've played every single game when they released, starting from God of War 1 all the way to Ragnarok and even Valhalla, where this thing made its triumphant return as a surprise. I could not believe it. I didn't see it in a million years ever coming back, because obviously we're in a new era. But Sony Santa Monica decided to reach in their bag one more time and give us this beauty. And after seeing it in action almost a decade later from my first encounter with it in God of War 2, I knew I had to make this build. So let's get into it, and I'll tell you guys how I actually made this to a full-size replica. Obviously, step one in making a build was to find the files. There was a file on Cult 3D that I found that was much detailed, had its own lock and key system for interlocking the pieces. It was pre-sliced. However, at the time, I didn't have the money to pay for such a file. Maybe I'll do an updated build video if this one does well. The files I used were from Skewed View 3D. Now, originally when I downloaded the files, it was not to human proportions at all. It wasn't even to godly proportions. It was more so akin to the old school NECA figures back in the day when God of War 2 had the Ares armor Kratos figure. That would be more so the size that it was at. What I did is I did a lot of research on what would be approximately the same scale of the Blade of Olympus, because if anybody who's played God of War knows that this thing is gargantuanly sized. From what I found out, Kratos in the original Greek trilogy was reported to be about 9 feet tall, which makes no goddamn sense. Once he got to the PS4 and PS5 era of God of War, they used more realistic proportions rather than the, and I quote, comic book proportions of the Greek pantheon to scale Kratos down to being about, I think it was 6'4", 6'7", or something like that. Using a bit of an eyeball method of measurement when I played God of War, I did the math as I'm 6'2". The sword comes up to about Kratos' nose. Using God of War 3's intro as a reference, if you subtract about how much it goes into the ground to his size, I got to a number roughly around 5'7" to 5'9"-ish, depending. So I took the files into Mesh Mixer and scaled them to a ridiculous level, to the point where it was pretty much proportionate to my body and my height. After doing that, I got it into Mesh Mixer and started playing around with slicing the file into, I think it was about 4 or 5 different pieces. I split the blade into 2 pieces using Nomad Sculpt, so that way the handle of the blade could come apart, because the original file was actually one solid piece, and anyone who's printed big swords know that ain't gonna work, especially if you need structural integrity. I split the blade and handle into 2 different pieces, remeshed the entire file, and so now I disconnected the handle from the base hilt to the blade, and the blade into 6 of its own individual parts, with a channel that I modeled into it to have about a 3/4 inch PVC pipe to a 1/2 inch PVC pipe across the handle and the blade respectively. We're on the phone camera because my actual camera is broken. Anyway, these are all the pieces for the Blade of Olympus. We have the handle, the bottom half of the hilt, the top half of the hilt, the 2 prongs that connect to the blade, 2 prongs that go on the bottom of the blade, the middle,
and then the top of the blade itself. The blade was supposed to be translucent PLA. However, I did not do the due diligence of modeling this to be able to fit LEDs. So for the time being, I might just consider putting an LED in the center because it really doesn't have like a glow effect. It more so glows around it. It varies from game to game. And then to keep everything sturdy, I have this PVC pipe. I think this is half-inch PVC pipe that goes into the handle to this, and then I have 3/4 an inch PVC pipe that go into the blade itself, as well as into these prongs that connect into the holes that go here. This is a little tricky because of the way these arms are made. They're not really meant to bend a certain way, but you kind of have to in order to get it right. As you can see, I've already cracked this one pretty good, but it's okay because you're not gonna see it, and I'm gonna sand it down anyway, so it works out. But yeah, this all goes together. So let me assemble this, and I'll show you guys what this looks like fully built up.
Let me just take this moment as I'm assembling this blade to tell you something about how cool it is to build big swords. You don't realize how big these props actually are until you start building them yourself. This was me putting the blade together just so I can get a frame of reference of how exactly large I've put myself in a predicament. And, well, my reaction pretty much says it all in the following clip. Bro, this is absolutely insane. Dude, this thing is huge. It's not too heavy. It's just very awkward. I probably could put some more support in, but I'm not going to, just because it's more of a display piece. I don't know if I'm going to do a God of War cosplay, but you never know. But this thing is absolutely ridiculously sized. I mean, this is nuts. Let me show y'all how big this is if I put it on its tip. Y'all ready? I'm 6'2", and this sword is almost my height. This sword proportionately, Kratos is I think about 8 feet tall, and the sword damn near is Kratos' height. So I shrunk it down to be proportionate to make it as life-size to me as possible, maybe a little bigger, just for the exaggerated proportions of the... I am just in awe at this. So now the goal is to PLA weld all of this together as best I can. I still have to print the eye diffusers, but those are going to go on last, just to cover up the eye holes. PLA all this, glue it down, and then we're ready for painting and sanding. So once I did that, it was just a matter of putting it all together. Now, the smart thing would have been to PLA weld it. However, I'm terrified of doing that. This was more of a display piece anyway, so I'm not too worried about getting scuffs or the paint running. But I was too nervous to actually try to PLA weld it. So what I did, don't do this unless you have the money to do it. I just had a bunch of super glue lying around. But I would go on the seams and put a heavy amount of super glue on the seams, use activator to harden it, and then sand it smooth. And as you guys can see on the finish of the blade, the seam lines are nearly non-existent. The only place I had an issue with the seam line is along the actual hilt itself, because I had to split that in half. And while it was curing with the glue, something knocked it out of alignment, so there was no way for me to actually get it apart. And honestly, I don't care. It still looks cool regardless. Once everything was ready, I got it all prepared by going with an 80 grit pass on all parts that were going to be joined together with 2-part sand or acrylite, while wrapping PVC pipe that were going into the channels with electrical tape, so that way the super glue had something even stronger to bond to. It was a trick I learned from Frankly Builds videos on one of his massive sword props, just to give that sword that extra strength and stability without having to worry about it, you know, coming apart if I ever were to wield it. By that point, the blade, the handle, and the hilt were all ready to go. Once I got comfortable to a point where I wanted to do some post-processing, it was more so the matter of sanding everything, which I did for 2 days and then proceeded to not do and wanted to try something else out. I had a couple friends who recommended doing acetone mixed with Bondo and brushing that on. And once I did that, it sped up the process of having to sand everything, because hitting it with 220 made it just as smooth as if I were to do 80, 120, 80, 220. I usually would do 80 grit sandpaper and then work my way up all the way to 220, but just for the sake of time and because I have other projects I need to get done, this is more so something that I just enjoyed. Also, wear a respirator. Mine didn't come in at the recording of this footage. Wear a respirator, PPE, and work outside. Do as I say, not as I do. So, if you're doing this, take more caution than I did. This is just a display piece to heal my inner child, which I desperately needed at the time. This sword is so ungodly heavy, but not for the reason you think. I printed it at about 5% infill on the blade itself with 3 walls. That's still a bit much, but I wanted to keep it as light as possible while still having some heft to it for structural integrity. The problem is the weight does not come from the sword itself. It's the way that the sword is designed. It's so top heavy because of the way that the blade is 4 times longer than the actual hilt, and the hilt doesn't have like a pommel to counterbalance it, that it makes it nigh impossible to wield. You can get it straight up and hold it, but it's better to hold it with 2 hands whenever you're wielding it. But I'm sure you guys will figure out a way. Once everything was sanded and ready to be smooth, I hit it with some Rust-Oleum sandable primer because the 2-in-1 was completely sold out. Hit it with about 220 grit sandpaper, 1 more coat, and then I started to wet sand it, which I realized I didn't record any of. And it was just a matter of hitting it with a black base coat, followed up by Rust-Oleum metallic silver, and then I would tape off the metallic silver and use Montana gold spray paint for the final finishes of the actual gold. The only problem with this gold, no matter how long you let it cure, it cannot take a clear coat with a completely dulling the finish. And even though in the games, the Blade of Olympus typically doesn't have that metallic of a finish until I think it was God of War 3. I really liked the reflective finish of that game, so I kind of mix and match the design elements between God of War 2, where it had more of a dull matte metallic finish, to a reflective chrome gold kind of finish. So even though it's at more high of a risk of getting scratch damage, this is more of a display piece, so to each their own. But for me, I just used base Montana gold, straight up left it alone. The last touches I did was to 3D print the eyes that were supposed to be diffusers, but I didn't have time. I didn't have the means to put LEDs in it to give it a gold accent along the face of the actual sword itself. And at the end of the day, the sword was done. It was completely finished and ready for photos. So without further ado, here's some beauty shots of the Blade of Olympus from God of War.
I've walked the earth and there are so few here that know how dark the night and just how cold the wind can blow. I've no more hunger now to see where the road will go. I've no more kept my warmth than blood upon the snow. Blood upon the snow.
Well, that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope to make more of these cosplay build tutorials for you guys. If you have a project that you'd like to see me tackle, or if you're curious about anything else that I am working on, make sure you follow me on all my socials and subscribe and hit that bell notification so you never miss an upload. And until next time, this is your boy Ryder CGA. For all things cosplay, gaming, and art related, make sure you keep it locked here on my channel, and I will see you guys on the next project. Peace.